righty. And hello, and good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may happen to be. I'm Tad. Still, despite all of my prayers, despite all of my labors, despite trying so desperately hard to be somebody cooler, younger, hipper. See, the very fact that I still say hip, which actually wasn't even a slang word when I was young. It was already kind of a mocking word like groovy. It's like people used hip in the 60s in a very straightforward way. And before that, even, hip's been around for quite a while. And people used groovy in the 60s in a very sincere kind of way. But by the time I came along a little bit later in my peer group, groovy was already pretty much of a joke, and hip was kind of that way too. Groovy, definitely. We used to say it like, sarcastically, like somebody would say something that we thought was kind of funny or silly or pointless or whatever, and we'd go, groovy, man. So anyway, I don't know why I'm off on that, but I am. I'm still just checking things here, so that's why I look distracted. Hello, good to see you all. I will be here until approximately 2 o'clock. We are reading more of The Wind in the Willows tonight. We're getting close to the end of the book. It's not going to be tonight, probably won't be tomorrow either, but it may be soon. What else did I want to mention to you? Somebody, and I'm not naming any names, but somebody failed to put back any soft drinks or sparkling water in the refrigerator. And we were out of sparkling water, so I can't really blame anybody for that. But the soft drinks, I will definitely be bearing a grudge on that one. Anyway, so I am, so that I have something to drink while I'm reading, I am forced to have a beer. I mention this only because I am not a regular drinker. I do drink occasionally, but and I don't think I'm a decent sized guy, so I don't think I'm going to get faced on one beer. But just in case I start to kind of slur partway through, that might be something to do with it. But I don't think so. Anyway, I'm sure there's probably some law against drinking and broadcasting, but since the Reagan administration dismantled most of the FCC's oversight powers back in the 80s, I'm in the driver's seat, baby. Anyway, what else did I want to talk to you guys about? Not a lot to say, really. I pretty much could just reel off all the stuff that I said last week. I'm working on, well, I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second, so I will elaborate on that a little bit, but signing, I finished with all the first half, the Siege, Green Angel Tower Siege proofs, or not proofs, but tip-ins. I've signed those. I still have the Storm, which is the other half of 2 Green Angel Tower in the British publication. So I still have those left to do, but I've done 4,500 of my 6,000 tip-ins. I am pleased to say, so I'm 3/4 of the way through. What else? Before I get to Splintered Sun, just the usual. Everybody's okay. Johnny got his blood work back with his vet. They couldn't find anything wrong with him at all, so we'll just wonder for now what it was that he ate that caused him to go all rubber-legged and drooly. But that was a week ago now, so he seems absolutely fine. In fact, he seems very chipper. So I don't know what that is. Let me think. Anything else? As you can see, the office is still a ghastly, ghastly mess. I've put up a couple of pictures behind me just to block the worst of it. I was trying to block off one of the cat boxes, but I did not succeed. But I'll get to it when I get to it. And what else was there? Okay, so working on the Splintered Sun. And one of the things that is interesting about working the way that I work is that I can plot things in great detail because the plots tend to follow the characters. And either I'm already adding plot to something that a character I already know about is doing, or I'm adding new plot on, and occasionally that means I'm bringing in some new characters. What I don't generally do when I am plotting is the world building side of things. Now, you would think after however many God knows years since back in the 80s, and now, and 6, 7, 8, 9 something different works based in Ostenard that I would know all of it by now. Well, I don't, and especially because I'm writing at different ages in the history of Ostenard, which makes it even more tricky to know exactly what's going on. The ones I'm reading now, as I mentioned, are like 200 something years before the Dragonbone Chair, and they are set primarily, although there will be a brief sojourn to the Hayholt, although it's not named the Hayholt yet. But other than that, it's mostly set in Hernistir, which those of you who've read the books know about Hernistir. Well, the issue is that I have never actually sat down and mapped out all of Hernistir. I have made some appropriate jottings. But now that I'm writing a book which is very much tied into the history of Hernistir and the geography and the cities and all that stuff, I realize that I am not ready to write yet until I straighten out some details. So I have spent most of the last few days drawing maps and looking up various things and doing research and taking every single thing I've ever published about Hernistir and pulling it all out so that I can check on various things and make sure. This is normally what my friends like Ron and Ilva and Jeremy and Angela help me with. But there's no point in getting them involved at this stage because I don't know what exactly all I'm going to need to know. So I'm doing most of this stuff by myself, as I usually have in the past, until I started the Witchwood Crown books. So that's what I have spent most of my last week doing, which is looking at the difference between bridges built in Europe in the 10th century and bridges built in Europe in the 13th century, and what kind of gates, what kind of city gates were they using in earlier ages than in the later ages of the Middle Ages, et cetera, et cetera. So I have been deeply involved in that kind of stuff and studying, medieval and Viking Age Dublin and all kinds of stuff, just trying to get different feelings about things that I can use to then, build up the complexity of and also, in a sense, establish the canon. There's that word, the canon, for Hernistir, with a lot of stuff that I haven't mentioned yet. I've mentioned various places and located them on maps and stuff in previous books, but there's going to be all kinds of new locations, and I have to know pretty much exactly where they are because, again, I'm one of those fantasy writers who really does his best. I don't always succeed, but I do my best to make things as accurate in-world as possible. And that is in terms of consistency, in terms of viability, in terms of just plain reality. If you have two things that are the equivalent of 200 miles apart, nobody is going to make that trip in a day. It's just not going to happen. And so you have to know these distances and how people in pre-industrial societies traveled, or even in pre-industrial semi-magical societies. You have to know that because it not only informs the facts of what you're writing and the plot and all that stuff, but it also very much affects the mindset of the characters. When you live in a world where almost everybody goes on foot, where horses are for most people as out of their reach as Lamborghinis, it changes the way you think about distances, about what is near, what is far, what is normal, what is foreign, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I've been mostly doing this week. I've written some here and there, but primarily I realized that I had more world building to do. I've named several rivers, for instance, but I haven't specified where some of them run and what they connect to and all that kind of stuff. And all this stuff will at least be something I want to know, even if I don't actively force it into the manuscript somewhere. So I'm doing a lot of that kind of stuff. Okay, what else? While I'm thinking if there's anything else that I want to talk about, let me go check and see if I'm actually talking to anybody. And if anybody has checked in, yes, it looks like it. So that is a good thing. I see Christina. Hello. I see Eva. Hello, darling. I see Holger. Good to see you. Wouter. A pleasure. Tash, hello. Dirk, Nikki, hi Nikki. Ivan, that's my friend Ivan. Good to see you, bud. Melissa, hello. Isaac, good to have you with me. Sandra, as always, a pleasure. Chris, hi, buddy. Iris and Petra and Olaf and Carol and Christy and Penny. Look at all those nice people. So hello, everybody. Good to see you. Pleasure to have you with me. I am trying to think if there was anything else. I've got Gute Besserung from 2 people. So that is always nice to hear. And let me think. Is there anything else that I really need to talk about? Nah, we're just, we're in the midst of many things. Actually, we have now sold my parents' house, so we're actually starting to think about, hey, if we have a little bit of money, what are we going to do to our house that we've been wanting to do for 20 years? Well, we haven't lived in this house that long. It's been more like 15. But, what are we going to do around here? And Deb is full of all kinds of crazy ideas like, we could paint the living room. And I'm like, yeah, and we could actually asphalt the driveway so it doesn't look like the entrance to Mount Doom, and things like that. So it's a glorious, exciting time when you can start thinking about asphalting your driveway. We're just over the moon about it. Okay, anything else that I wanted to say? Yeah, not really. Feel free. Well, it's always hard while I'm online. And it's always hard to see I just hit comments like I wanted to read the comments, and it will only let me see the last couple of comments. I don't know why this is. Why can you get comments when you're just reading, but when you're doing an actual broadcast where you have actual real-time need for comments, can you not see the comments? What is your problem, Facebook? Why do you hate me? Why do you hate me? I don't hate you. I'm not that kind of person. I don't hate inanimate objects, even if they are part of a huge global empire of madness and cruelty. Anyway, so good to see you all. Thank you for bearing with me while I meander and ramble. I am going to be reading, and I'm going to be reading from Wind in the Willows. And I hope you guys are enjoying this. I know it's not anything of mine, but as I've mentioned before, it's highly significant to me, and I also just think it's really well written. It's just a good book. So we finished with the chapter that was called Wayfarers All, which was about Water Rat, having a crisis of conscience because of meeting for lack of a better word, a ship rat, a rat who travels around the world, who waxed rhapsodic about things like approaching Oriental ports and visiting far-flung places and all this kind of stuff, and hit the rat, who normally is very much a home-loving character, hit him right where he lives, and he was ready to leave. He was ready to head off around the world with the sea rat when Mole came back and pretty much deprogrammed him. It really does. I mean, considering this was written back in the 19... Well, it says copyright 1908. I didn't realize it was that early. I was thinking it was more like the early 1920s. But considering how far back it's written, it's quite a good representation of deprogramming a cult member, because that's basically what Mole has to do, because Rat is about to walk out. So anyway, that chapter ended, and then we started the further adventures of Toad in the next chapter. And Toad has escaped from the jail that he was in, which it is suggested in some ways that it might be the Tower of London, because of all the warders and things like that, and the fact that it's a castle, and et cetera, et cetera. And then Toad has struck out on his own, still in his washerwoman disguise, across country, trying to find his way back to Toad Hall after leaping off a train, so he doesn't really know exactly where he is. And he has just been picked up by a woman on a canal boat. And this is a canal boat being pulled by a horse or a donkey, which were very common in those days, and especially before engines were kind of ubiquitous. You had to have an animal. You had an ox or a horse or something, and they would pull your canal boat along the canal. They would walk on the towpath, which is how the term towpath, I believe, originates, because it was literally from where the boat would be towed. The animal would walk along the towpath with a rope attached to a harness and pull the canal boat along. Those of you who have been in England or anywhere else that has canals probably know what kind of boat I'm talking about. They tend to be flat-bottomed or very, very flat, low to the water, so they don't have much drag. But also because they are in canals. They have to be low enough to go under bridges, and they have to be shallow enough to not scrape on these not very deep canals. So the woman who has rescued Toad thinks that he is a washerwoman. And Toad, of course, being Toad and being unable to help himself, foolish Toad, has started bragging about, I'll just go back and read the last couple of paragraphs.
So you're in the washing business, ma'am, said the bargewoman politely as they glided along. And a very good business you've got too, I dare say, if I'm not making too free in saying so. Finest business in the whole county, said Toad airily. All the gentry come to me. Wouldn't go to anyone else if they were paid. They know me so well. You see, I understand my work thoroughly and attend to it all myself. Washing, ironing, clear starching, making up gents' fine shirts for evening wear. Everything's done under my own eye. But surely you don't do all that work yourself, ma'am? Asked the bargewoman respectfully. Oh, I have girls, said Toad lightly. 20 girls or thereabouts. Always at work, but you know what girls are, ma'am. Nasty little hussies. That's what I call them. So do I, too, said the bargewoman with great heartiness. But I dare say you set yours to rights, the idle trollops. And are you very fond of washing? I love it, said Toad. I simply dote on it. Never so happy as when I've got both arms in the wash-tub. But then it comes so easy to me. No trouble at all. A real pleasure, I assure you, ma'am. What a bit of luck meeting you, observed the bargewoman thoughtfully. A regular piece of good fortune for both of us. Why, what do you mean? Asked Toad nervously. Well, look at me now, replied the bargewoman. I like washing too, just the same as you do. And for that matter, whether I like it or not, I have got to do all my own, naturally, moving about as I do. Now, my husband, he's such a fellow for shirking his work and leaving the barge to me, that never a moment do I get for seeing to my own affairs. By rights he should be here now, either steering or attending to the horse, though luckily the horse has sense enough to attend to himself. Instead of which he's gone off with a dog to see if they can't pick up a rabbit for dinner somewhere. Says he'll catch me up at the next lock. Well, that's as may be. I don't trust him once he gets off with that dog, who's worse than he is. But meantime, how am I going to get on with my washing? Oh, never mind about the washing, said Toad, not liking the subject. Try and fix your mind on that rabbit. A nice fat young rabbit, I'll be bound. Got any onions? I can't fix my mind on anything but my washing, said the bargewoman. And I wonder you can be talking of rabbits with such a joyful prospect before you. There's a heap of things of mine that you'll find in a corner of the cabin. If you'll just take one or two of the most necessary sort, I won't venture to describe them to a lady like you, but you'll recognize 'em at a glance. And put 'em through the wash-tub as we go along. Why, it'll be a pleasure to you, as you rightly say, and a real help to me. You'll find a tub handy, and soap, and a kettle on the stove, and a bucket to haul up water from the canal with. Then I shall know you're enjoying yourself, instead of sitting here idle, looking at the scenery and yawning your poor head off." "Here, you let me steer," said Toad, now thoroughly frightened, "and then you can get on with your washing your own way. I might spoil your things, or not do 'em as you like. I'm more used to gentlemen's things myself. It's my special line." "Let you steer?" replied the barge woman, laughing. "It takes some practice to steer a barge proper. Besides, it's dull work, and I want you to be happy. No, you shall do the washing you are so fond of, and I'll stick to steering that I understand. Don't try and deprive me of the pleasure of giving you a treat." Toad was fairly cornered. He looked for escape this way and that, saw that he was too far from the bank for a flying leap, and sullenly resigned himself to his fate. "If it comes to that," he thought in desperation, "I suppose any fool can wash." He fetched tub, soap, and other necessaries from the cabin, selected a few garments at random, tried to recollect what he had seen in casual glances through laundry windows, and set to. A long half-hour passed, and every minute of it saw Toad getting crosser and crosser. Nothing that he could do to the things seemed to please them or do them good. He tried coaxing, he tried slapping, he tried punching. They smiled back at him out of the tub, unconverted, happy in their original sin. Once or twice he looked nervously over his shoulder at the barge woman, but she appeared to be gazing out in front of her, absorbed in her steering. His back ached badly, and he noticed with dismay that his paws were beginning to get all crinkly. Now, Toad was very proud of his paws. He muttered under his breath words that should never pass the lips of either washerwoman or Toad's, and lost the soap for the 50th time. A burst of laughter made him straighten himself and look round. And here, by the way, is a photo of Toad trying to wash and not having much success at all. Poor Toad. When will he learn? A burst of laughter made him straighten himself and look round. The barge woman was leaning back and laughing unrestrainedly, till the tears ran down her cheeks. "I've been watching you all the time," she gasped. "I thought you must be an humbug all along from the conceited way you talked. Pretty washerwoman you are. Never washed so much as a dishclout in your life, I'll lay." Toad's temper, which had been simmering viciously for some time, now fairly boiled over, and he lost all control of himself. "You common, low, fat barge woman," he shouted. "Don't you dare talk to your betters like that. What's a woman indeed? I would have you to know that I am a Toad, a very well-known, respected, distinguished Toad. I may be under a bit of a cloud at present, but I will not be laughed at by a barge woman." The woman moved nearer to him and peered under his bonnet keenly and closely. "Why, so you are!" she cried. "Well, I never! An horrid, nasty, crawly Toad! And in my nice, clean barge, too! Now, that is a thing that I will not have." She relinquished the tiller for a moment,
One big mottled arm shot out and caught Toad by a foreleg, while the other gripped him fast by a hind leg. Then the world turned suddenly upside down. The barge seemed to flit lightly across the sky. The wind whistled in his ears, and Toad found himself flying through the air, revolving rapidly as he went. The water, when he eventually reached it with a loud splash, proved quite cold enough for his taste, though its chill was not sufficient to quell his proud spirit or shake the heat of his furious temper. He rose to the surface spluttering, and when he had wiped the duckweed out of his eyes, the first thing he saw was the fat barge woman looking back at him over the stern of the retreating barge and laughing. And he vowed, as he coughed and choked, to be even with her. He struck out for the shore, but the cotton gown greatly impeded his efforts, and when at length he touched land, he found it hard to climb up the steep bank unassisted. He had to take a minute or two's rest to recover his breath. Then, gathering his wet skirts well over his arms, he started to run after the barge as fast as his legs would carry him, wild with indignation, thirsting for revenge. The barge woman was still laughing when he drew up level with her. "Put yourself through the mangle, washerwoman," she called out, "and iron your face and crimp it, and you'll pass for a quite decent-looking Toad." Toad never paused to reply. Solid revenge was what he wanted, not cheap, windy verbal triumphs, though he had a thing or two in his mind that he would have liked to say. He saw what he wanted ahead of him. Running swiftly on, he overtook the horse, unfastened the tow rope, and cast off, jumped lightly on the horse's back, and urged it to a gallop by kicking it vigorously in the sides. He steered for the open country, abandoning the towpath and swinging his steed down a rutty lane. Once he looked back and saw that the barge had run aground on the other side of the canal, and the barge woman was gesticulating wildly and shouting, "Stop! Stop! Stop! I've heard that thong before," said Toad, laughing as he continued to spur his steed onward in its wild career. And here is the wicked Toad on the stolen towpath horse. Oh, Toad. The barge horse was not capable of any very sustained effort, and its gallop soon subsided into a trot, and its trot into an easy walk. But Toad was quite contented with this, knowing that he, at any rate, was moving, and the barge was not. He had quite recovered his temper now that he had done something he thought really clever, and he was satisfied to jog along quietly in the sun, taking advantage of any byways and bridle paths, and trying to forget how very long it was since he had had a square meal, till the canal had been left very far behind him. He had traveled some miles, his horse and he was feeling drowsy in the hot sunshine, when the horse stopped, lowered his head, and began to nibble the grass, and Toad, waking up, just saved himself from falling off by an effort. He looked about him and found he was on a wide common, dotted with patches of gorse and bramble as far as he could see. Near him stood a dingy gypsy caravan, and beside it a man was sitting on a bucket, turned upside down, very busy smoking and staring into the wide world. A fire of sticks was burning nearby, and over the fire hung an iron pot, and out of that pot came forth bubblings and gurglings and a vague, suggestive steaminess. Also smells, warm, rich, and varied smells, that twined and twisted and wreathed themselves at last into one complete, voluptuous, perfect smell that seemed like the very soul of nature taking form and appearing to her children, a true goddess, a mother of solace and comfort. Toad now knew well that he had not been really hungry before. What he had felt earlier in the day had been a mere trifling qualm. This was the real thing at last, and no mistake, and it would have to be dealt with speedily, too. or there would be trouble for somebody or something. He looked the gypsy over carefully, wondering vaguely whether it would be easier to fight him or cajole him. So there he sat and sniffed and looked at the gypsy, and the gypsy sat and smoked and looked at him. Presently the gypsy took his pipe out of his mouth and remarked in a careless way, "Want to sell that there horse of yours?" Toad was completely taken aback. He did not know the gypsies were very fond of horse dealing, and never missed an opportunity, and he had not reflected that caravans were always on the move, and took a deal of drawing. It had not occurred to him to turn the horse into cash, but the gypsy's suggestion seemed to smooth the way toward the two things he wanted so badly, ready money and a solid breakfast. "What?" he said. "Me sell this beautiful young horse of mine? Oh, no, it's out of the question. Who's going to take the washing home to my customers every week? Besides, I'm too fond of him, and he simply dotes on me." "Try and love a donkey," suggested the gypsy. "Some people do." "You don't seem to see," continued Toad, "that this fine horse of mine is a cut above you altogether. He's a blood horse, he is, partly, not the part you see, of course, another part. And he's been a prize hackney, too, in his time. That was the time before you knew him, but you can still tell it on him at a glance if you understand anything about horses. No, it's not to be thought of for a moment. All the same, how much might you be disposed to offer me for this beautiful young horse of mine?" The gypsy looked the horse over, and then he looked Toad over with equal care, and looked at the horse again. "Shillin' a leg," he said briefly, and turned away, continuing to smoke and trying to stare the wide world out of countenance. "A shilling a leg!" cried Toad. "If you please, I must take a little time to work that out and see just what it comes to." He climbed down off his horse and left it to graze, and sat down by the gypsy and did sums on his fingers, and at last he said, "A shilling a leg? Why, that comes to exactly 4 shillings and no more. Oh, no, I could not think of accepting 4 shillings for this beautiful young horse of mine." "Well," said the gypsy, "I'll tell you what I will do. I'll make it 5 shillings, and that's 3 and 6pence more than the animal's worth, and that's my last word." Then Toad sat and pondered, long and deeply, for he was hungry and quite penniless, and still some way, he knew not how far, from home, and enemies might still be looking for him. To one in such a situation, 5 shillings may very well appear a large sum of money. On the other hand, it did not seem very much to get for a horse. But then again, the horse hadn't cost him anything, so whatever he got was all clear profit. At last he said, firmly, "Look here, gypsy, I shall tell you what we will do, and this is my last word. You shall hand me over 6 shillings and 6pence, cash down, and further, in addition thereto, you shall give me as much breakfast as I can possibly eat, at one sitting, of course, out of that iron pot of yours that keeps sending forth such delicious and exciting smells. In return, I will make over to you my spirited young horse, with all the beautiful harness and trappings that are on him freely thrown in. If that's not good enough for you, say so, and I'll be getting on. I know a man near here who's wanted this horse of mine for years." The gypsy grumbled frightfully, and declared if he did a few more deals of that sort, he'd be ruined. But in the end he lugged a dirty canvas bag out of the depths of his trouser pocket and counted out 6 shillings and 6pence, into Toad's paw. Then he disappeared into the caravan for an instant and returned with a large iron plate and a knife, fork, and spoon. He tilted up the pot, and a glorious stream of hot, rich stew gurgled into the plate. It was, indeed, the most beautiful stew in the world, being made of partridges and pheasants and chickens and hares and rabbits and peahens and guinea fowls and one or two other things. Toad took the plate on his lap, almost crying, and stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and kept asking for more, and the gypsy never grudged it him. And here is Toad, happily eating the gypsy's stew, still in his washerwoman outfit, with his strange little washerwoman bonnet. He thought that he had never eaten so good a breakfast in all his life. When Toad has taken as much stew on board as he thought he could possibly hold, he got up and said farewell to the gypsy, and took an affectionate goodbye of the horse, and the gypsy, who knew the riverside well, gave him directions which way to go, and he set forth on his travels again in the best possible spirits. He was indeed a very different Toad. Whoops. Sorry, folks, just a second. I put that down, and my beer went splurch over the top and onto the floor. So give me a second. Oh, dear. Well, that's a first. That'll teach me to be such a cavalier drinker of beer. Okay. He was indeed a very different Toad from the animal of an hour ago. The sun was shining brightly. His wet clothes were quite dry again. He had money in his pocket once more. He was nearing home and friends and safety. And, most and best of all, he had had a substantial meal, hot and nourishing, and felt big and strong and careless and self-confident. As he tramped along gaily, he thought of his adventures and escapes, and how, when things seemed at their worst, he had always managed to find a way out. And his pride and conceit began to swell within him. "Ho, ho!" he said to himself as he marched along with his chin in the air. "What a clever Toad I am! There is surely no animal equal to me for cleverness in the whole world. My enemies shut me up in prison, encircled by sentries, watched night and day by warders. I walk out through them all by sheer ability, coupled with courage. They pursue me with engines and policemen and revolvers. I snap my fingers at them and vanish, laughing, into space. I am, unfortunately, thrown into a canal by a woman, fat of body and very evil-minded. What of it? I swim ashore. I seize her horse. I ride off in triumph, and I sell the horse for a whole pocket full of money and an excellent breakfast. Ho! Ho! I am the Toad, the handsome, the popular, the successful Toad. He got so puffed up with conceit that he made up a song as he walked in praise of himself, and sang it at the top of his voice, though there was no one to hear him but him. It was perhaps the most conceited song that any animal has ever composed. The world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go down to fame compared with that of Toad. The clever men at Oxford know all that there is to be knowed, but they none of them know one half as much as intelligent Mr. Toad. The animals sat in the ark and cried, their tears in torrents flowed. Who was it said, "There's land ahead," encouraging Mr. Toad? The army,
all saluted as they marched along the road. Was it the king or Kitchener? No, it was Mr. Toad. The Queen and her ladies-in-waiting sat at the window and sewed. She cried, "Look, who's that handsome man?" They answered, "Mr. Toad." There was a great deal more of the same sort, but too dreadfully conceited to be written down. These are some of the milder verses. He sang as he walked, and he walked as he sang, and got more inflated every minute. But his pride was shortly to have a severe fall. After some miles of country lanes, he reached the high road, and as he turned into it and glanced along its white length, he saw approaching him a speck that turned into a dot, and then into a blob, and then into something very familiar, and a double note of warning, only too well known, fell on his delighted ear. "This is something like," said the excited Toad. "This is real life again. This is once more the great world from which I have been missed so long. I will hail them, my brothers of the wheel, and pitch them a yarn of the sort that has been so successful hitherto, and they will give me a lift, of course, and then I will talk to them some more, and perhaps with luck it may even end in my driving up to Toad Hall in a motor car. That will be one in the eye for Badger." He stepped confidently out into the road to hail the motor car, which came along at an easy pace, slowing down as it neared the lane, when suddenly he became very pale, his heart turned to water, his knees shook and yielded under him, and he doubled up and collapsed with a sickening pain in his interior. And well he might, the unhappy animal, for the approaching car was the very one he had stolen out of the yard of the Red Lion Hotel on that fatal day when all his troubles began. And the people in it were the very same people he had sat and watched at luncheon in the coffee room. He sank down in a shabby, miserable heap in the road, murmuring to himself in his despair, "It's all up. It's all over now. Chains and policemen again. Prison again. Dry bread and water again. Oh, what a fool I have been. What did I want to go strutting about the country for, singing conceited songs and hailing people in broad day on the high road, instead of hiding till nightfall and slipping home quietly by back ways? Oh, hapless Toad! Oh, ill-fated animal!" The terrible motor car drew slowly nearer and nearer, till at last he heard it stop just short of him. Two gentlemen got out and walked round the trembling heap of crumpled misery lying in the road, and one of them said, "Oh dear, this is very sad. Here is a poor old thing, a washerwoman apparently, who has fainted in the road. Perhaps she's overcome by the heat, poor creature, or possibly she has not had any food today. Let us lift her into the car and take her to the nearest village, where doubtless she has friends." They tenderly lifted Toad into the motor car and propped him up with soft cushions and proceeded on their way. When Toad heard them talk in so kind and sympathetic a manner, and knew that he was not recognized, his courage began to revive, and he cautiously opened first one eye and then the other. "Look," said one of the gentlemen, "she is better already. The fresh air is doing her good. How do you feel now, ma'am?" "Thank you kindly, sir," said Toad in a feeble voice. "I'm feeling a great deal better." "That's right," said the gentleman. "Now keep quite still, and above all, don't try to talk." "I won't," said Toad. "I was only thinking if I might sit on the front seat, there, beside the driver, where I could get the fresh air full in my face. I should soon be all right again." "What a very sensible woman," said the gentleman. "Of course you shall." So they carefully helped Toad into the front seat beside the driver, and on they went once more. Toad was almost himself again by now. He sat up, looked about him, and tried to beat down the tremors, the yearnings, the old cravings that rose up and beset him and took possession of him entirely. "It is fate," he said to himself. "Why strive? Why struggle?" And he turned to the driver at his side. "Please, sir," he said, "I wish you would kindly let me try and drive the car for a little. I've been watching you carefully, and it looks so easy and so interesting, and I should love to be able to tell my friends that I had once driven a motor car." The driver laughed at the proposal so heartily that the gentleman inquired what the matter was. When he heard, he said to Toad's delight, "Bravo, ma'am! I like your spirit. Let her have a try and look after her. She won't do any harm." Toad eagerly scrambled into the seat vacated by the driver, took the steering wheel in his hands, listened with affected humility to the instructions given him, and set the car in motion, but very slowly and carefully at first, for he was determined to be prudent. The gentlemen behind clapped their hands and applauded, and Toad heard them saying, "How well she does it! Fancy a washerwoman driving a car as well as that the first time." Toad went a little faster, then faster still and faster. He heard the gentleman calling out warningly, "Be careful, washerwoman!" And this annoyed him, and he began to lose his head. And here's a picture I like very much. Whoops, where we go? There we are. Of Toad beginning to drive faster and faster, and the people whose car it is coming to realize their peril. "Be careful, washerwoman!" And this annoyed him, and he began to lose his head. The driver tried to interfere, but he pinned him down in his seat with one elbow and put on full speed. The rush of air in his face, the hum of the engine, and the light jump of the car beneath him intoxicated his weak brain. "Washerwoman, indeed!" he shouted recklessly. "Ho! Ho! I am the Toad, the motor car snatcher, the prison breaker, the Toad who always escapes. Sit still, and you shall know what driving really is, for you are in the hands of the famous, the skillful, the entirely fearless Toad." With a cry of horror, the whole party rose and flung themselves on him. "Seize him!" they cried. "Seize the Toad, the wicked animal who stole our motor car! Bind him, chain him, drag him to the nearest police station. Down with the desperate and dangerous Toad!" Alas! They should have thought. They ought to have been more prudent. They should have remembered to stop the motor car somehow before playing any pranks of that sort. With a half turn of the wheel, the Toad sent the car crashing through the low hedge that ran along the roadside. One mighty bound, a violent shock, and the wheels of the car were churning up the thick mud of a horse pond. Toad found himself flying through the air with the strong upward rush and delicate curve of a swallow. He liked the motion, and was just beginning to wonder whether it would go on until he developed wings and turned into a toad bird, when he landed on his back with a thump in the soft, rich grass of a meadow. Sitting up, he could just see the motor car in the pond, nearly submerged. The gentleman and the driver, encumbered by their long coats, were floundering helplessly in the water. He picked himself up rapidly and set off running across country as hard as he could, scrambling through the hedges, jumping ditches, pounding across fields, till he was breathless and weary and had to settle down into an easy walk.
When he had recovered his breath somewhat and was able to think calmly, he began to giggle. And from giggling he took to laughing, and he laughed until he had to sit down under a hedge. "Oh, oh!" he cried in ecstasies of self-admiration. "Toad! Again! Toad, as usual, comes out on top. Who was it who got them to give him a lift? Who managed to get on the front seat for the sake of fresh air? Who persuaded them into letting him see if he could drive? Who landed them all in a horse pond? Who escaped, flying gaily and unscathed through the air, leaving the narrow-minded, grudging, timid excursionists in the mud, where they should rightly be? Why, Toad, of course. Clever Toad, great Toad, good Toad." Then he burst into song again and chanted with uplifting voice, "The motor car went poop, poop, poop as it raced along the road. Who was it steered it into a pond? Ingenious Mr. Toad. Oh, how clever I am! How clever, how clever, how very clever." A slight noise at a distance behind him made him turn his head and look. Oh, horror! Oh, misery! Oh, despair! About 2 fields off, a chauffeur in his leather gaiters and 2 large rural policemen were visible, running toward him as hard as they could go. Poor Toad sprang to his feet and pelted away again, his heart in his mouth. "Oh, my!" he gasped as he panted along. "What an ass I am! What a conceited and a heedless ass! Swaggering again, shouting and singing songs again, sitting still and gassing again. Oh, my! Oh, my! Oh, my!" And here's Toad running from the chauffeur, whoops, and 2 local policemen. He glanced back and saw to his dismay that they were gaining on him. On he ran desperately, but kept looking back and saw that they still gained steadily. He did his best, but he was a fat animal, and his legs were short, and still they gained. He could hear them close behind him now. Ceasing to heed where he was going, he struggled on, blindly and wildly, looking back over his shoulder at his now triumphant enemies, when suddenly the earth failed under his feet. He grasped at the air, and splash! He found himself head over ears in deep water, rapid water, water that bore him along with a force he could not contend with, and he knew that in his blind panic he had run straight into the river. He rose to the surface and tried to grasp the reeds and the rushes that grew along the water's edge close under the bank, but the stream was so strong that it tore them out of his hands. "Oh, my!" gasped poor Toad. "If ever I steal a motor car again, if ever I sing another conceited song—" Then down he went, and came up breathless and sputtering. Presently he saw that he was approaching a big dark hole in the bank, just above his head, and as the stream bore him past, he reached up with a paw and caught hold of the edge and held on. Then slowly and with difficulty he drew himself up out of the water, till at last he was able to rest his elbows on the edge of the hole. There he remained for some minutes, puffing and panting, for he was quite exhausted. As he sighed and blew and stared before him into the dark hole, some bright small thing shone and twinkled in its depths, moving towards him. As it approached, a face grew up gradually around it, and it was a familiar face, brown and small, with whiskers, grave and round, with neat ears and silky hair. It was the water rat. Let me see if I can never get this thing. There we go. It was the water rat. And now we'll see if it can focus in. And there's Toad climbing up the bank. And that is the end of that chapter. So I'm going to save the last couple of chapters for tomorrow night. I think that will probably finish it off, but I'm not 100% certain. But I think we will probably finish tomorrow night. If it's close, I'll just keep reading till the end. What else did I... Oh, and I have a question for anybody out there who knows, but especially for Christian Fabricius, Chris Fab, which is, does anybody know if I read a story called Strong Medicine out of a Western anthology, whose name I can't quite remember, but the story was called Strong Medicine, and it was about a town called Medicine Dance, Arizona. A fantastical story. I just found a copy of that anthology, and I don't remember if that was one of the ones that I read. I think I read most of my short stories, but I'm not 100% certain that I read that one. So if anybody out there knows, I don't know off the top of my head, and I'm not going to have a chance for a while to kind of look through them all. But if anybody knows, please post it for me on Facebook or something like that. Chris, you may know, but I don't want to put you to a lot of trouble, so don't go looking all the way through it, because I could, look through all the posted ones, because I could do that myself. But I just thought somebody might go, oh yeah, I remember that story. Anyway, so we are now just about approaching 2 o'clock, and we have just finished, so I'm going to wrap it up for the night. Anything important I wanted to say? Anything I wanted to pass along or share? Not that I can think of, just that it's always a pleasure to spend some time with you. I hope you're enjoying Wind in the Willows, which we're almost done with. Mr. Toad, as I have mentioned many times, was a major character in our family. Wind in the Willows, Peanuts, various other, the Winnie the Pooh stories. These were all things that were so much a part of my childhood that they became the ways we talked about things. My mom frequently used to compare herself to Lucy because she said she was always feeling crabby about things. And crabby was very much a Peanuts word that we co-opted. And of course, Toad, and being a this Toad or a that Toad. Please be a sensible Toad. That was a family comment quite frequently when somebody was having a meltdown about something. Although the word meltdown didn't exist back then either, now that I think of it. I don't think meltdown came along until the China Syndrome in the late 1970s. Anyway, but with that, I'm going to wrap it up for the night. It is almost time to go, so it is time to go. That's how that works. I will ask you to please take good care of yourselves and your loved ones, your family members, your friends and neighbors. We can all help each other out. I have some beer I have to mop up. But other than that, I'm finished for the night. So once again, thank you. Peace. Be well, all of you. And for those who want to join me tomorrow or later tonight at 7 p.m., I will be probably finishing off Wind in the Willows. And if it's close at the end, I will just read past the top of the hour. So that's where that's at. You are where you're at. That's a good place to be. I will see you very soon.